my people. How y'all doing? It's surprisingly, it said it's only like 48 degrees, but it's a surprisingly warm day. A little overcast. This clouds over here are scaring the living crap out of me. We've got what looks like an abandoned Domino's delivery car right here. So I guess you can say all is right in the world. It's May 2nd, 2021. You know what that means. It's a new day, a new story. Remember though, before we get started, to help my channel grow and blossom, burst into adulthood, remember to like, share, subscribe, hit up my Patreon. I'm always posting new stuff there to give you some bang for your buck, and you're obviously helping me out as well. The link to my Patreon is in the description below, along with the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages, closely related to the content that I am posting here, as well as my primary channel, Steve the Amateur Historian. If you haven't headed over to that channel yet, go and do it. You won't regret it. If you like what I'm doing here, you're gonna love what I'm doing over there. And if you wonder why I always do that so fast, well, it's because it's something you got to do to promote yourself and to help your channel grow. But I know people don't want to sit through that video after video, especially if they've already subscribed. So that's my best common ground. Anyway, onward to today's video. Now I remember being about 7-ish years old. It would have been around 1993, and my family and I traveled up to my first time to visit Seattle. And I remember the people there were really effing rude. My mom tried to ask people where a coffee place was in Seattle. Just goes to show how long ago it was, and just nobody would talk to her. Anyway, we went up there to visit my great grandmother Hilda, who was 93 at the time and could still walk circles around us. She had amazing energy for a woman who was about 93, 94 at the time. But on our way, this is my first time really going north into Washington, and I-5, the freeway, it kind of straddles the border of Oregon and Washington on Washington's side, and I looked across and I saw this big thing towering up into the sky, kind of like the water tower off in the distance there. Can you, yeah, right there, towering in the sky. It was like this big kind of uneven cylinder. I was like, what is, and you know, like when you're a kid and you see something, you don't even know what it is, but because it's big, it scares you. I was like, oh my God, what is that? Well, it was a power plant. It was a Trojan is what it was known as. It's since been demolished. But that was my first time seeing it, and I was bewildered. What is this thing? So this Trojan power plant, you know, the big reactor, was all there just on the Oregon side of the river, about 45 miles northwest of Portland. And according to this article I read, it produced nearly a quarter of all of Oregon's electricity. So this thing was kind of a big deal. Now, that being said, we're going back to 1979 for today's story. Did I say the date earlier? I think I said the wrong date. Whatever, I'll fix it in post. Anyway, one of the big stories to come out of America in 1979 was the meltdown at 3 Mile Island, which was on the East Coast, but it was a power plant where it could have ended up being so much worse than it was, but it freaked people out. And it was one of those moments. It wasn't quite Chernobyl, but it was one of those moments that most people in America, they live in a state of ignorance in terms of a lot of what's going on. But then when something big happens, all of a sudden it's thrown in our face and we all know about it. And when 3 Mile Island incident happened back in 1979, all of a sudden everybody across the country is scared to death of, these power plants, and the fears of, radiation and nuclear waste spreading. And, we remember what the effects of dropping bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima back at the end of World War II. We saw the effects of that. So things like, terms like, radiation, nuclear power, I think those things already made people a little uneasy in the back of their minds, but then 3 Mile Island happened, and all of a sudden people are freaked. Like, something like that should be so cordoned off and protected, and there should be a backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan of anything that goes wrong in a facility like this, where the repercussions can be so massive. And yet 3 Mile Island happened. Yeah, you're kind of a little baby 3 Mile Island. Well, not quite. I don't even know if you're a baby Trojan. And in short, they had a partial meltdown of one of their reactors, and there was a leak of radiation as a result of that. Again, 3 Mile Island could have been a lot worse than what it ended up being. But it instilled fear in people, and it's still, to this day, the worst meltdown, as far as I know, that we've had in America. So something similar, similar events have probably occurred, but something much worse has fortunately not happened. And it seems to me like we've been kind of moving away from nuclear reactors and that kind of thing to produce our power as much. At least we have. I mean, the Trojan plant's gone, but case in point, that incident occurred. And the people in Portland acknowledge, there's a nuclear reactor less than 50 miles away from us. So, of course, I guarantee after that happened, anybody that knew that the Trojan reactor was a real thing and that it was not too far from Portland, I guarantee you, in short time after 3 Mile Island happened, those people were starting to sweat a little bit. And I probably would have gotten, I don't know if I would have gotten super nervous, but there was definitely people getting concerned. Like, well, it happened there. What are you going to tell us? You're going to tell us that, oh, well, that happened there, but we do things differently at the Trojan plant. It's like, nope, that's just PR that's just, PR jargon. If it can happen there, it can happen probably just about any power plant. So people were understandably getting a little uncomfortable in Portland and any real surrounding area. And a lot of locals were not hiding their feelings about this. A lot of people were like, shut the thing down. It's too dangerous. Find a new way to produce electricity. If it costs a little bit more money, who cares? We do not feel safe. Again, I guarantee you, pretty much nobody had anything to say about the Trojan plant until 3 Mile Island happened, and then, people started to panic. That's just our way. We wait till a major event happens, and it's like, nope, I'm scared now. Shut it down. Shut it down. So, Portland General Electric, who was pretty much running the Trojan plant, because even though they're called Portland General Electric, or PGE, they span way outside of Portland in terms of their reach. So they get this guy, Gary Zimmerman, to come out, and I would have expected him to do a little bit better, at least from a PR perspective, of really trying to quash people's fears, because people had to be getting real stressed. And even the articles, it doesn't state that, this spokesperson for PGE came out and said, don't worry, there's no chance a 3 Mile Island is going to happen here. But instead it starts with this spokesman said that he's pretty certain that nothing like this could happen, and that's just, I don't want these people lying to us, but in a scenario like that, like when you got people panicking, like, just say it's not going to happen, because people are still going to be stressed and pissed. They're still going to tell you to shut it down, but you're not going to help the public outcry by saying, I don't think it'll happen. I bet my watch it's not going to happen. And he also made mention, talk about timely, because literally this article I read is March 31st, 1979. This was days after 3 Mile Island happened, and Zimmerman said that about a month earlier, So just a couple weeks before the 3 Mile Island incident, they had done some reconstruction on the Trojan plant and re-strengthened its walls because they found they were too weak to withstand an earthquake. So, I mean, from the one side, I'm like, okay, good. I'm glad they figured that out and strengthened the walls. But I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, you guys are going to act like nothing bad can happen. But up until a couple weeks ago, the walls of this thing weren't even strong enough to sustain a certain level of earthquake. And that makes me feel like there's other stuff with the Trojan reactor that maybe hadn't been assessed properly or had been assessed and people were keeping hush-hush about. Or things they just hadn't noticed. I mean, if it took them that long to notice that about the walls, which is a pretty significant thing, that a nuclear reactor can't handle a certain level of earthquake, what if a big quake hit, you know, and that thing just went down? So, again, some PR work being done, but I mean, if I was around at that time and that was what they were telling me, I wouldn't really feel all that better. I would still be nervous. Like, it's this thing way off in the distance that if something does go wrong, we very well might be in a lot of trouble. People all around, their health, you know, aside from the people that would just die potentially from radiation exposure, you're talking about lots of health effects for lots of people all around. But still, you know, Zimmerman said, you know, he said what you'd expect. Well, 3 Mile Island and the Trojan plant are different. We have different safety protocols. We do things a little different over here on the West Coast. But then when asked directly if something of you know, that magnitude could happen at the Trojan plant, again, the article at the start infers that he said probably, you know, pretty certain. Well, when they asked him that question, his response was, I don't think so. How does that instill confidence in the people? And then he goes on to state that he has limited knowledge of what happened at 3 Mile Island. And you'd think this guy works for the company that runs this nuclear reactor. There was a partial meltdown of a reactor days earlier. You know, obviously you can't know all the details, but why do you only have limited information about what happened there? And what are you doing out here making claims that, yeah, it's pretty unlikely that that's going to happen here when you clearly have limited details about what happened at this other plant? Until you are more informed, until you have more than limited information about what happened, do not be making, I mean, that may be part of the reason why he said, I don't think so, but still, it's like, see, now I'm going back on what I said earlier about, you know, when people are freaked out, just lie a little bit. But now I'm like, you know, if the guy would have been totally honest, which now I'm more leaning towards, considering the fact that he didn't really know much about the incident. But now I'm like, okay, he would have had to say, well, I don't know. Not yet. We need to investigate this more. So I don't know. Maybe it was okay to hit somewhere in the middle. I guess he was being honest. But still, it was honesty with this obvious push towards saying, like, don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. Just don't even talk. I don't think it's going to happen. You don't think it's going to happen. We don't think it's going to happen. Don't worry. I have an ethical dilemma with this story. Fortunately, you know, nothing actually did happen at the Trojan nuclear plant, but they didn't know that back then. But, okay, while I maybe give this guy a pass, maybe it was best for him to hit in the middle and say, probably not, I don't think so. Here's where I deviate from Mr. Zimmerman again. And it's because I hate this crap. I hate it when people come out and say this stuff. And it happens a lot. You and I have experienced it over and over again. And it's a common tactic used when people are trying to, you know, bring down the significance of something. So Zimmerman then, you know, after telling us how safe the Trojan plant is, and don't worry, we have more water than 3 Mile Island did, and just all this stuff. he then proceeds to say that, there's really no real danger. Just what's made people so stressed and so freaked out is that the coverage of the 3 Mile Island, the media coverage of 3 Mile Island, was bombastic, and it was blown out of proportion, and it created this, inaccurate portrayal that's led people to, mass panic. And that based on what he'd seen, granted again with his limited information on the matter, based on what he'd seen, like the amount of radiation that got out would not really have been enough to seriously harm anyone. He pretty much said, hey, nobody died, so everybody just calm down. And I'm just like, just because nobody died doesn't mean that if things had gone a little bit differently, somebody wouldn't have. We're looking at things like nuclear reactors, where if something goes wrong, something goes drastically wrong. We're looking at a Chernobyl situation. We're looking at lots of people getting infected who might not be able to get away in time. We're looking at lots of people getting sick, lots of possible deaths. We're looking at literally a mass national tragedy that could have resulted from, situations such as what happened at 3 Mile Island. Fortunately, that didn't happen, but the fact that things went wrong there showed it could happen, and it has happened before. Again, Chernobyl. So to come out here and act like it's not that big of a deal, and to use the classic, like, I don't know, everyone's getting so uptight, nobody died, and to downplay the significance of a nuclear reactor nearly having a complete meltdown, and addressing the concern of the populace, which I can understand, addressing the concerns of the populace that, hey, we have a nuclear reactor. And to say that the media went too far because they made a big deal about the fact that a freaking nuclear reactor nearly had a total meltdown, and that had more radiation been released, people would have gotten sick and people would have died, and endless number of other effects that could have happened. And to sit there and do the whole like, well, in the end, nothing really happened. Okay, a guy robs a supermarket or a convenience store. The convenience store worker pulls out a gun and some shots are exchanged. A big shootout, boom, 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 but nobody actually hits each other, and the thief runs away out of the store, and the store owner finally peeks his head back up and then calls the police. That's a scenario where you can say, hey, nobody died. But in a situation like that, which still, it would have been tragic if these two guys had shot each other or one had shot the other. But that sort of crime, if you're using kind of like a utilitarian argument, the one that affects the most people, a shootout, between worker and criminal at a convenience store is like that, next to the effects of what can happen if a Trojan, or not a Trojan, but a nuclear reactor has a meltdown. This is not something to be laissez-faire about. This is not something to sweep under the rug. This is not something to not be concerned about. This is not a minor issue. And that seemed to be this guy from PGE's, his best effort. PGE picks this guy of all people to come out and talk to the public and the press. And the best he can do is say, well, I don't think that same thing's going to happen here. And also, you know what? There wasn't that much radiation and nobody died, so slow your roll, people. It really wasn't that big of a deal. I don't know why people are talking about this. 3 Mile Island is still to this day, a major story in 20th century history, considering what did happen and what could have happened. So, Zimmerman, I was annoyed with you at first, then I kind of understood you, and now I hate you. Because you used that BS logic that I hate when people use. When a big incident happens and they say, well, in the end, nothing horrible really happened. I hate that logic. It not only is stupid, it not only downplays the severity of certain events, but if one or two people do die, it downplays their deaths and degrades them as humans. So again, Fortunately, nothing did actually happen at the Trojan plant. But with Mr. Zimmerman's take on it, I don't know if I would have really felt all that comfortable, but it was definitely something I wanted to cover. It's local Portland history, but I feel like the effects of this were being felt, you know, pretty much any area in America that had a nuclear plant somewhere in their vicinity. I'm sure this kind of thing was happening all over the place in places that had that kind of setup near them, and people would get nervous. And this was just kind of Portland's, I guess, experience in dealing with that. So it was timely in terms of this, you know, near national tragedy that could have happened. But, you know, it tied in with this Trojan plant that, again, the first time I saw it, I was like 7. I was like, what is that big, frightening thing? You are a tall drink of water. So again, it's always interesting to look back at, you know, you see the big event happen, but you often don't see these little aftershocks, these lingering effects of these major events, such as this situation that was going on in Portland and the local power companies, at least in the case of this article, their kind of lackluster effort in quashing it a little bit and trying to keep people calm. But it was a heck of a story, I guess. I mean, the 3 Mile Island one was. I really don't know about the Trojan one since nothing happened, but I'd like to thank you all. Wait, okay, the map lied to me. It said that there was a road that went through this way. No, it went through that way. I'm reading everything backwards. Sorry, I got lost. I didn't want to end up at the end of a cul-de-sac not knowing where I was going by the end of this video. But, anyway, I would like to thank you so much, as always, for joining me, taking in my content, hopefully being able to support my channel the best you can. It's real easy. You gotta like the videos, that always helps. Subscribe to my channel, that helps it grow. Share my content around if you so choose. I'm certainly not gonna force you to, because I ain't paying you. Speaking of payment, if you want to hit up my Patreon and help me out there, I'm posting there, you know, pretty regularly. So I'm giving you bang for your buck, and you're helping me out and making it easier for me to do what I do. The link to my Patreon is in the description below, along with the links to my Facebook and Instagram pages closely related to the content that I'm producing both here, as well as my primary channel, Steve the Amateur Historian. If you haven't hit that channel up, go ahead and do it. If you like what I'm doing here, you're gonna love what I'm doing over there. Whew. And all that said, this has been Steve, and I'll see you tomorrow.